Dale, when you started, I was going to ask you for a web page or a phone number to order one of those, but now I don't know. It just got me really scared. I'm here to shamelessly promote two things. The first is Hill Country Property, and the second is Nothing to Lose. This is the prequel published last. This is the sequel published first. This takes place around Austin and San Antonio over about a 30-year period, and basically at San Marcos. And so I wrote it in 1985, and so it took 30 years to publish. In the letter that I sent to the editor who finally published it, I said that this novel or this manuscript has, if my count is correct, has killed one editor, put one publishing house out of business, has also corrupted or killed a literary agency, so read at your own risk. And one of those publishers looked at it, had it for 4 years, and had as a reader a brand new Ivy League graduate, 23 years old. He gave it to this woman, and she returned it back and said, "You said this was a novel of the 70s. I don't understand. They don't seem any different from us today." And so that gave me the idea to start promoting it as a historical novel. So it's about ancient history back in the 1970s. The Austin portion takes place in 1985. It's framed in 1985 because that's when I wrote it. And so it's historical for that reason. It basically concerns an out-of-luck 20th century cowboy. Basically, he's a bum. He has a broken down horse farm outside of San Marcos. He goes to San Antonio in 1948, meets the daughter of a grocer. She's impressed. She marries him. She finds out that his horse farm doesn't have electricity. She sees that her life will never improve married to him. And so she does the worst thing a woman could do in the early 1950s, and that is to desert her family. She has one adopted child, a male named Kyle, and one daughter named Victoria. Her name is Rebecca. So she leaves the family. The story is narrated by the son-in-law who marries Victoria. So jump to 1985, in and around Austin, Henry's dying. And his marriage is crumbling. And he's a failed lawyer who's taken over trying to run the horse farm. It's going to disaster. So he thinks that if he can go find the deserted mother and get her back to the dying husband, that he could fix everything. And so this is the part that takes place in Austin in 1985, which does seem sort of historical now that I'm looking around out here. And it's his returning after having found the the deserted mother and trying to bring news of her back. And so he's tempted, and he stops in at 6th Street before he goes on to try to find out what happened to the dying father-in-law. The happy hour crowd was roaming down the sidewalks of 6th Street, grazing on the hors d'oeuvres and watered-down liquor. My t-shirt clung to my sweaty chest. I probably smelled like one of Henry's hard-rode horses. I walked into a polished brass and wood bar and re-entered a little bit of my old world. A few people wore hats, straws, tennis, or baseball. Henry's sweat-soaked Stetson was out of place. A smiling waitress with the look of a UT student bought me a beer anyway. I tipped her too much and called Victoria. Nobody was at home. At home was Henry's death. Here was life. I carried my foamy draft to the corner of the bar and sat. People started to drift in as the sun lowered, and I looked out the window of the bar. The cops closed the streets to the vehicles. The sidewalks came to life. Businessmen had loosened ties and sports coats slung over their arms. Some women, also just off work, fanned themselves. Some wild men, probably college students, slipped out of their shirts and stuffed the tails back into their pants to let the shirts dangle in front or in back of them like loincloths. One girl took her shirt off too. Her breast bounced as she walked down the crowded sidewalk. People stared for a while until the cops cuffed her, wrapped her in her shirt, and took her down to the house. Several punksters were out in their green and blue hair. They were wrapped around sunglasses and their safety pin noses and ears. But most of the people in the crowd were the new arrivals in Austin, the people with money. They wore khaki or navy shorts, sandals, or running shoes, and loose-fitting cotton shirts bought from prestigious stores. I wished for sandals and shorts because my jeans stuck to my legs and climbed up my crotch. More people came in. The air conditioning was trying, but the people brought the humidity in with them, making the bar just barely cooler than the evening. Jazz started from somewhere farther up in the bar where I couldn't see. It grew louder, and the whole place shook with the music. A waitress balancing a tray above her head stopped by me and asked me what I wanted to drink. A bead of sweat rolled down her nose and splattered on her bare chest. Pretending I had money, I ordered a Jack Daniels on the rocks. I wiped my forehead with the back of my palm and turned around. I bumped noses with a tall, black-haired woman. "Excuse me," I said. She eyed me, then said, "No problem." "Crowded," I shouted above the music. "This isn't bad," she said. I looked more closely at her and glanced down at her legs. She wore a black lace skirt and a white sleeveless blouse. Her hair was long on one side and short on the other. On her feet she had black spiked heels. She sipped a pina colada or grasshopper or some other repulsive colored frozen drink. She turned away from me to talk to the friend she was talking to before bumping into me. She said, "One night stands are it for me. No more intimate emotional bullshit." "No shit," the other woman said, leaned forward and kissed the woman on the mouth. I turned away from it and smiled to myself. There was life in this dripping hot place. It was like the fertile sludge our ancestor amoeba crawled out of. But the patrons weren't the sludge of society. They had to have money. The waiters and bartenders were fresh-faced, good-looking UT students. The girls dressed to show off breasts or thighs, and they had no disgust for the people they waited on. They looked enviously at their customers and tried to imitate them, for they knew if they kept their noses clean, didn't party too much and flunk out, majored in the right subjects, a few of them would be the next wave of the young, new, rich going to the bars on 6th Street. The patrons were a consumer cult, but they had a conscience. They could have had bigger bucks in larger cities, Houston, Dallas, New York, any big commercial center, but they gave concessions to dollars, bought their way out, so to speak, to live in Austin or other unique cities, San Diego, Santa Fe, Denver, where life was better. In 1984, they had the best lives available. My waitress brought my drink. I gave her $3 and told her to keep the change. I was like the students, though, who ogled these people. In truth, I envied them. But because of what I once was, and maybe because of what I had become, the realization left me repulsed with myself. Halfway through my drink, a boom sounded so loud it shook the plate glass window of the bar. The people in the crowd turned, knocking each other's drinks over and bumping noses, cheeks, breasts, and chests to look out the window. Then, when the rain poured down, the people in the bar cheered. The first waves of rain hit the street and sidewalk, and steam rose up off the cement and asphalt, and people in the street stared up at the sky to let the rain wash their faces. I gulped down my drink, pushed past the woman in black and white, and went into the rain. I too looked up and let the rain wash the dried sweat and stink off my face. The steam settled and the rain cooled the dusk. I took off my boots and walked through the puddles back to my car. I had lots of company. People all around me sloshed the rain, kicked at the puddles, and ran their fingers through their wet hair. In Austin, that early Friday evening, some undeclared celebration you could see in people's eyes was going on. But I was Lazarus, come back from the people my in-laws had killed off, and I needed to give my report of the dead. I plugged my forefinger into my ear and dialed with my other forefinger. Again, no one answered. I hoped my guess was not right. I pulled off my boots and socks and walked through the rain to Breckenridge Hospital. It was the first time I'd really been cool since I'd been in Texas. I stepped near the hospital with my wet clothes dripping on the floor, making a small puddle, and shivered in the cold air conditioning. I pulled my socks over my wet feet, then squeezed my feet into my wet boots. At the reception desk, I asked if Henry Bowling was in. A nurse whispered over her shoulder to another one. They paged a doctor. I told them I was a part of the family, but they made me wait for the doctor. The doctor showed me to a room in ICU. I opened the door to the dark room and saw figures turn to look at me. I recognized Henry, though. He was lying in a bed with a nightlight beam shining on his lower chin and chest. Tubes were coming out of his nose and arms. He rolled his head toward me, then rolled it back to look straight up. I didn't see why we had to sit by him and torture ourselves while adding to his indignity. If you really die alone, as Becky said, we ought to just leave Henry to himself. I moved to the back of the room in the darker shadows, grew disgusted, and thought I maybe should have shot him when I shot him to save all of us this misery and embarrassment. The old, hard-luck, ignorant cowboy wouldn't want us to watch him die. So that's from Hill Country Property. Years later, I wrote this, the sequel. So there's something like 25 years in between. So you've got Roger Jackson, that's the narrator, that's the guy who's narrating. He loses his wife, he loses his family, Henry dies, he fails, and so he's bitter. What he learns in Austin is how to become a private investigator. He spies on cheating spouses and takes photos of them to give to lawyers. And he finds out the cheating spouse business is better in Beaumont, Texas. And so he lives some 25 years in Beaumont. And so this is from Nothing to Lose, which is the Beaumont novel. The title is Nothing to Lose, which is a bad choice. It was a different title. But that's a play on the bar. That's the bar that he goes to. He's borderline alcoholic, he's a grump, he's a grouch, he's bean. And he goes to this bar called Nothing to Lose. Because it's in Beaumont, they were inspired by Janis Joplin, and they wanted to name it after something Janis Joplin sang, so they chose Me and Bobby McGee, but they got the lyric wrong. It was nothing left to lose, but typical of the area, they didn't quite listen right and get it together, so it's the wrong name. But these are two sort of rants from Roger while he's, one while he's jogging, one while he's trying to end the book. The good thing about Beaumont in September is that it isn't Beaumont in August. September is mostly hot and muggy with air so thick you almost have to shove it up your nose with your thumb. August makes you wish you were dead, makes you forget what it's like to wear a clean, dry shirt, makes you believe that the true Son of God is Willis Carrier, the man who invented practical air conditioning. July is as bad. June, May, September, and October are just miserable, not unbearable. I live on the southeastern edge of Texas's Pine Tree Curtain in Beaumont. In my house, near Jefferson County's northern line, I am surrounded by pines. If I drive just a little south, down State Highway 69, the East Tex Freeway, I am in marshland and former rice fields. The pines give up, as though this soil is just too soft, porous, and damp to support a sizable tree. In Jefferson and Orange County, the humidity soaks through everything, never lets up, never truly lets the sun in to dry things out. So the people living behind the pine curtain live in claustrophobic, damp, dark, smelly tunnels carved under the trees and through the undergrowth, mud, mush, and swamps. Texans have an Aggie joke. An Aggie takes his girl out parking. They get passionate. She tells the Aggie that she wants him to kiss her someplace dark, smelly, and wet. So he drives her to Beaumont. And this is later. I live in a land of 3 Ps, pine, petroleum, and Pentecostals. The old-growth pines are long gone, but the symmetrically planted new pines, gifts from the timber industry, have thick vines, wall strawberries, and onion plants, poison and other ivies, tallow-weed trees growing in between them and clogging their space and sucking up their oxygen, just as the new pines were once the trash trees for the old-growth trees, the evolution of trash. At the base of the new pines is mud, mush, or swamp. In the deep swamps and bayous, the pines have to compete with the ingenious cypress trees, which shoot their knees up above the water so that they don't drown. The new pines groan and push themselves above the undergrowth and trash trees before they can relax and actually become trees and sprout and spread healthy green limbs. All that twisting, intertwined, choking growth is without order or symmetry. What guides this growth is an almost unnatural, almost unhealthy, certainly destructive yearning for life and domination. So all the flora in the area tries to smother all rivals. Everything not connected to a plant's far-reaching roots is an enemy. Most of this flora ought to have the dignity to just give up, let go, and goddamn die. The people aren't much better. People living in Beaumont and behind the pine curtain get the desire to get some height or elevation, to get out of their tunnels through the pines, humidity, and pollution. They aren't birds, and their cars can take their bodies only so far, but not their memories or souls. They never leave their jobs with petroleum or pine industries for long. Back home in the familiar, dark, smelly tunnels, they know that there's danger, tragedy, perhaps the devil himself out there. They know that they must confront him. They become Pentecostal. Even the Cajun Catholics turn Pentecostal. Their snake handling and talking in tongues just takes an older, more French, more papal mysticism. For they too sense evil out there. They don't believe they can avoid it, so they use their own charms and practices to protect themselves from the devil's charms. But in Beaumont, which aches but fails to be a real city, just as the tallows ache but fail to be real trees, and in the mid-Jefferson County white flight communities, people turn Baptist. They fear the Pentecostal view is right and are scared of it. For the Baptists in Beaumont, And its suburbs, the devil is lurking out there behind the pine curtain and out in the wider world. Their desire is to protect themselves, to hide from the devil, not confront them like Pentecostals. So they lived in gated communities far off next to the refineries. The Baptists of Jefferson County provide me with a living. I find the serpent, talk to him, kiss him, and then hide him. I don't make much of a living from the Pentecostals behind the pine curtain. Pentecostals confront sin. They don't run from it, deny it, or try to escape it. They take their own photos, then beat or kill their own. From living so long in squats, they see no reason to involve the authorities or even anyone outside the family. For instance, you know those times when you just can't go to sleep? Say somewhere around 3 in the morning, you wander through your house and hear only the silence of the still world. You listen harder, and sometimes the silence talks back. There are voices in the silent hours. For Pentecostals, those are the voices of God. The angels are the devil. Baptists, secure in their suburbs, their modern churches, their money, don't wake up. For you, those voices may be just the sound of being alone, a wish for a little company. They may be the start or sign of depression, alcoholism, or dementia. They may be apprehension of danger, hard times, or suffering for you or your family. They're all the same, whatever you call them. Just listen for them, but be ready for what they tell you. And just one quick comment, and then I'll get out of here. See Texas Monthly next to last issue?
Yeah.
10 writers to know. Well, I have 2 complaints under Lisa Sandlin, who I have met, and a wonderful novel, The Do Right, said in Beaumont. Well, the Texas Monthly says, essentially implies that this is the first noir Beaumont novel. Well, I scooped it by a year, and so did several other people. I think Beaumont, if you listen to this, is just the right place for steamy, hot, nasty noir. And so take a trip to Beaumont and get noir. They also said, and I think Dale will bear this out with me, it's 10 writers to watch, as though these are all up-and-coming people who just popped into the scene. And if you look at their ages, they're all in their 50s or 60s. You know, they've been doing this for 20 or 30 years. Now, finally, to get their name in Texas Monthly. So, yeah, thank you, Texas Monthly, and thank you. And maybe just looking around, look at you folks, maybe Malvern Books is the antidote to Texas Monthly writing.